I'm convinced that 2025 marks the start of a golden era, and these are the 6 things that I am doing to make sure that I am making the most of this opportunity. So grab your cup of tea and let's dive into it. We are officially a quarter of the way through the 21st century, and I am just so positive about the next few years ahead. I truly feel like we are entering a golden era. So I plan to have not just the best year ever, but the best years ahead, and that is truly what I hope for you as well. So if you think beyond just 2025 and you start to have more of a future orientation and you think 3, 5, 10 years ahead, then what would you be doing today to plant the seeds that your future self will be able to reap the benefits of? That's what I want to break down in today's episode. Let's dive into my plan for how I plan to enter the golden era. Tip number 1 is to set the intention. Economic pressures and other elements have made this a pretty challenging last couple of years for a lot of people. And on top of that, this came after the pandemic and all of the lockdowns and uncertainty, and for some people, loss that brought. And I truly believe, even despite all of the doom and gloom that we have experienced, that there is also just so much opportunity that lies in the years ahead. There has never been more opportunity in the space of technology, in the information that you can have access to in social media. I'm not going to go into all of the specifics of why I think we are entering the golden era, but they relate to things like technology, the economy, and cultural shifts as well. But what is more important is that I have the mindset that that is going to be the case. Whether or not it is true, I have set the intention that that is what I see the next few years being. And that is changing the way that I behave and the way that I plan as a result. The thing about this packaging of something being a golden era is that traditionally, most often, it tends to be something that people look back on in past years. So they view these golden eras that the world has experienced in terms of prosperity, success, well-being, with a sense of nostalgia, like it was a certain period that has already been. But if you were to, for example, take away the element of hindsight and instead use that as an intention that you have the foresight that that is coming, and as though you are at the start of that period, then how would that change the way that you behave, the way that you plan your day, the decisions you make, the investment strategies you take, and different elements as well? If you were entering your golden era, if you set that intention, then how would this dictate your decision making? Tip number 2 is that you attract the energy that you create. So this idea of the golden era is not just something that I came up with in this video. It's actually something that I have implemented into my life in really sort of detailed ways. I first started discussing this with my husband, and we now start to talk about this as though it is actually reality and not just something that we are wishing for. And I have integrated this into my vision board, which if you want to know more about that, I have a previous episode on doing this as well. It's something that I've also integrated into my Pinterest boards. I've also integrated it into the way that I am writing my goals, which I also talked about in a previous episode as well, if you want to learn more about my recommendations for the specifics of how to best write your goals. So I've really taken on board this packaging of this year, or these years ahead, being the golden era. And this really relates to psychology and neurolinguistics programming of acting as if. So acting as if you already have it, to allow you to then reverse engineer what you need to do from here to be able to get to that desired outcome state. I've shared previously a book that I really loved called Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself by Joe Dispenza. And in it, he talks about this idea of the quantum you. He talks about everything being made up of subatomic particles, and they exist everywhere and nowhere at once until they are observed. So there is this quantum reality that exists only as potential until you are able to draw it into you with this electromagnetic pull. The mind and matter are completely entangled, and Joe Dispenza says that quantum field contains a reality in which you are healthy, wealthy, and happy, and possess all of the qualities and capabilities of the idealized self that you hold in your thoughts. As I said in a previous episode, think about this as being a broadcast. If you are broadcasting to this potential field what it is that your intention is, then you are going to pull that thing in towards you, or you are going to be able to find that thing where it is, which is why this idea of thinking in the present tense can be really important when it comes to goal setting, because it allows you to, I guess, use the law of attraction to meet that thing where it is. So if I go into the next few years, for example, believing that this is going to be the golden era, instead of getting caught up in potential doom and gloom narratives, then I behave differently. Then I attract that thing to me. My tip number 3 is to set clearly categorized goals. So if you want to know more about my goal setting process, I discussed this in a couple of previous episodes, one about my goal setting routine and another one, as I mentioned, about the specifics of how I write my goals. But for the purpose of this episode, I want to share 2 techniques that I use to help me to categorize those goals. My first technique was inspired by Michael Hyatt's book, Your Best Year Ever, where he talks about these 10 different areas in which you should be ideally setting your goals within. And he suggests having between, say, 7 or 10 of them be your priorities. And this is about asking yourself, in particular, what is it that you should be focusing on at this particular time? So in some cases, maybe some of them won't be relevant or aren't relevant to you, but you might choose to focus on specific ones for that season of your life. And the different domains that he highlights as a part of that are spiritual, intellectual, emotional, physical, marital, parental, social, vocational, avocational, and financial. As a side note, one of my favorite parts of his domain is that he actually has included the avocational element in there as well. If you have watched my channel before, you might know that I'm a big fan of people having hobbies and how important and how valuable these can be. I talked about all of this in a previous episode about the value of high value hobbies and what that can actually bring to your life and your work. So I really love that he has included that, because most of the other frameworks that I see are usually focused on things like your finances, your health, and your relationships more than anything. And I love that his framework just takes that a little bit further in this wheel of life that he describes, and having hobbies being an important element of that as well. So a key aspect of this, as I mentioned, is really defining the areas in which you want to focus on and prioritizing what your goal within those things will be. So for example, in the spiritual domain in the past year, one of my goals was that I wanted to be able to read the Bible cover to cover for the first time. I am Christian, I grew up Christian, and I'm familiar with various aspects of the Bible, but I haven't actually read it in its entirety. So I made that one of my spiritual goals. And in my intellectual goals, for example, if you follow this channel, you would know I am a pretty avid reader, but I am usually really committed primarily only to non-fiction books. That is where I feel like I thrive. That is what I'm most comfortable in. That's what I feel like I get the most out of. But I really wanted to push my comfort zone in the past year, and I made one of my goals to have at least one book every week be a book that was related to classic literature. So reading fiction and reading classics and, really Hall of Fame style books in that space every week. And I really enjoyed the opportunity to just extend my comfort zone and really just do something that I wouldn't normally do in that space. In the physical realm, for example, in the last year, I tried to make that focus be on yoga. In previous years, it has been in other things as well. So have a look through that list and ask yourself, if you were to pick, say, just one thing in 7 to, all 10 of those areas, what would it be and what would you want to be prioritizing? Then I overlay this technique through my own technique of making sure that this relates back to my core values. And when I say that, I don't mean that you're just doing a bit of a vague general sense check with yourself to make sure that these things relate to your values. I mean by actually doing the work of having defined your values in the first place. So this is something that I've talked about in detail on my blog before, and I've done the work of actually setting myself 5 core values that dictate my decision making. So this is much like a business would operate. A business would have core values that drive their priorities, and I'm really a big fan of people setting these for themselves. And if this is something that you haven't done yet, maybe take this opportunity to actually define what your own 4 or 5 core values might be. That then helps me to align those with the goals that I have written for myself and make sure that I am covering things in all aspects of those domains too. So I try and just overlay those 2 techniques of making sure that I am ticking quite a few of the boxes in Michael Hyatt's domains with my own values as well, and making sure there is alignment and synergy with those things too. My tip number 4 is to identify the opportunities that others aren't. When it comes to goal setting and establishing new habits, we can get this really sort of insular focus on purely what we are trying to achieve. And if you've listened to or you've tuned into my previous episode on writing goals, you would know that there is significant benefit in having this self-initiated approach to your goal setting, and that you really do need to focus on the things that you can control as opposed to trying to think too much about what you can't control. So when you are thinking about entering your golden era, the way that you will succeed in that space is to identify opportunities that other people aren't necessarily investing in. So by that, I mean thinking like a business, for example. So I come from a marketing background and a business background. And one of the main things that you do in that space is that you conduct an environmental analysis. You really take the time to understand what is happening in the world around you that affects your products and your services, and what people might actually need in a marketplace. But when it comes to our own personal goals, sometimes we don't take that more holistic approach to how we are setting goals for ourselves, or how we actually think that we can benefit from an opportunity that maybe others are potentially ignoring. And maybe it's not just that they are ignoring it. Maybe it is an opportunity that they are avoiding. Maybe it is something that people are making fun of currently. But if you think again about a golden era, the idea is to think with a future orientation. So a lot of the things that are made fun of to begin with is actually the things that people can see the most success in. It's the people that were prepared to take that risk that are able to reap the rewards from that. In his book, Courage is Calling, Brian Holiday says, "The paradox, of course, is that almost everything new, everything impressive, everything bright was done over the loud objections of the status quo. Most of what is beloved now was looked down upon at the time of its creation or adoption by people who now pretend that never happened." So keep in mind that the majority of people play it safe, and the minority of people are the ones who take the risks that other people aren't prepared to. But the thing about risk is that that is where there is the most reward. And if it was easy or if it was safe, then the majority of people would be doing it. And if the majority of people would be doing it, then would it be as valuable? Would the reward be as significant? And I'm not just talking about financial things here. This is not financial advice in any way. I'm talking about any opportunity that you could invest your time and your energy into. What is it that you could see a positive return on investment for if you were to actually leverage what that opportunity is creating for people that other people may not be currently doing? My tip number 5 is to play the long game. In one of my favorite books that I've talked about a lot on this channel, Grant Cardone's The 10X Rule, he talks about the fact that people tend to be really good at overestimating what they can achieve in a year, but underestimating what they can achieve in several years. So thinking more in that long-term time frame. And as a result of not being able to have that future orientation, it means that we limit what we do in the present moment, in that shorter time frame. So when you have a stronger future orientation, or you set higher goals in that space, then it changes the way that you behave in the more short-term future as well, which is what I've said to you about me setting this golden era mindset, is that it is changing the way that I plan, knowing that I will reap the benefits of those things in several years. For example, even if things weren't to completely turn around this year, it doesn't mean that you can't still leverage the opportunities that they present. If you take, for example, the economy, and if that didn't completely turn around, it means, for example, that the stocks might be cheaper or undervalued compared to what they would normally be in the marketplace, which means that stocks are on sale. If crypto crashes, it means that you could pick up crypto or buy into or extend your footprint in that market in a cheaper way than had that not been the case. And again, this isn't financial advice, but this is about, in whatever realm, no matter what the next year or the next several years hold, what is the opportunity that you can identify in that space for that long-term gain that you will see? This idea of thinking long-term is also something that I got from Robert Kiyosaki's book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, which is also one of my favorite books. And in it, he says, our assets are large enough to grow by themselves. It's like planting a tree. You water it for years, then one day it doesn't need you anymore. Its roots are implanted deep enough. Then the tree provides shade for your enjoyment. Sometimes these seeds that we plant don't necessarily sprout when we most expected them or when we most wanted them, but they will in their own time, and often this happens unexpectedly. That's why playing the long game when it comes to any of the things that you want to invest in, any of your pursuits, your projects, is really important, because when you play the long game, then the rules of your game change. And this is something that Simon Sinek talks about in his book, Infinite Game. He talks about there being two types of games. So you have the finite game and the infinite game. The finite game has a defined set of rules. It has known players. And by having those defined sets of rules, it means that when the outcome of the game is achieved, then the game is over, because you can identify who has won and the game has finished. But in the infinite game, there are no set rules and there's no known players, which means that the rules of the game are different and players can change the rules of the game. And that means that the goal of the game then becomes to continue to perpetuate the game, to keep playing. So the idea is that if there is something that you are pursuing, like a project, it is to think long term, to ask yourself how you would behave if this was something that you were committed to for life, for example, versus something that you are just doing in the short term, really putting that long view lens on the way that you are behaving and planning. And tip number 6 is to invest your time. As I've said throughout this episode, this does not just need to be about your financial golden era. This can also be about where you are investing your time. And in a lot of spaces, sometimes that can be things that you can do completely for free or at a very low cost. For example, in the Almanac of Naval Ravikant, he is quoted as saying, "Code and media are permissionless leverage. They are the leverage behind the newly rich. You can create software and media that works for you while you sleep. If you can't code, write books and blogs, record videos and podcasts." It costs almost next to nothing or a very minimal cost to create your own podcast if you don't have one already, to start your own YouTube channel. And that is you investing in media. That is you investing in a space, investing your time and your energy into something that you could potentially have a future in, that your future self might be able to benefit from. And if you want to know more about why I see this as being a really significant space to be investing in at the moment, then check out my previous episode on new media versus old media and the seismic shift that I see happening in this space. Thanks so much, and I'll see you on the next episode.